I probably won't stand behind here a lot.
Okay.
It's not my style. But I have to push these buttons every now and then.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the April 3rd Thursday lunchtime lecture at the Dorset Historical Society. I'm the curator, John Mathewson, and I'd like you to welcome Avis Hayden, our speaker today. She's been a hobby genealogist since 1990, and after retiring from her career in healthcare, she delved deeper into that field, completing a program in genealogical research from Boston University in 2016. She has published 5 research articles and is presented at the New England Historical and Genealogical Conference. She volunteers at the Bennington Museum Research Library and with the Russell Collection of Vermontiana down in Arlington. It's a great place to visit. And without further ado, I'll have her talk about Lucy Terry Prince and her life in Sunderland.
You want to come in?
Welcome.
Okay. All right, so here we go. So can everybody see this well enough? So Lucy Prince and her family lived in different places at different times, and she began in Africa, settled in Deerfield, lived in Guilford, Vermont for a while. She and her family were in Sunderland for a total of 57 years, and then her descendants moved to Geneva, New York. So the bulk of what I'm going to talk about are the Sunderland years. That's sort of how I've prepared my remarks. Now, have any of you seen this book or read this book?
Yes.
Yeah, this is a great, I found this a fascinating story. It reads, even though it's historical, it reads like a novel, really. And in this book, Gretchen Gerzina, the author, covers mostly this period of time, but she does devote her last chapter to Sunderland. So when I picked up this research, I started in Sunderland and went this way. So if any of you want the earlier history, I'm not going to cover that today. I'll touch on it a little bit, but I encourage you to look at this book. There's also another book down in Massachusetts, this book. It's also very good, historical thing. So my quest began when somebody approached my husband, who's sort of the town historian de facto, not officially, in Sunderland, and asked him, where did Lucy Prince live? And he goes, what? I don't know who she is. What's the story? So he got the story, and Jim is very good with maps and deeds and all those things, and he did figure out where she lived, and I'll show you all of that. My part of that story was, well, who the heck is Lucy Prince? So I did my research more on her and her family. As John said, I'm a genealogist, so that's what interested me. So she was born in Africa around 1725. She was brought to America as a 5-year-old girl as a slave. She was sold to a man named Samuel Terry, and therefore got the name Lucy Terry. She lived in the home of Ebenezer and Abigail Wells in Old Deerfield. Have any of you been to Old Deerfield? Nice place. On one of the corners, have you seen Lucy's house? The Wells house? Well, on one of the corners there's a robin egg blue house. That's the house where the Wellses lived, and there's a room there that was her little servant quarters, slave quarters. She was a house slave. This couple never had any children of their own. And I don't know this, but it's sort of my belief that because she was precocious in language, they probably helped foster as much of that as they could in her. And as a result, she became a poet. And she is America's first African-American poet because of one poem that she wrote in 1746 that happened to survive. And it only survived her because it got to the newspaper in Springfield, Massachusetts, and somebody there published it in the 1800s. My fantasy, it'll never come true, is that there's some like leather briefcase full of other poems that she wrote, probably will never happen. But I'm sure she wrote other things. Her poem Bars Fight, oh, I took that slide out. In case you think Bars Fight is a poem about a brawl in a saloon, it is not. It's the Deerfield massacre that occurred in the bar, the swamp outside of Deerfield, and she chronicled that poem for posterity. So she met and married a man named Abijah Prince. So he's got a fascinating story in here where he managed to buy his way out of slavery, and then he bought her way out of slavery, and the two of them married in 1756 in Deerfield. And Deerfield has really good records about this family, so we know they had 6 children. I'm not going to go into all 6 of them, but you will hear about them as I talk about them. The only one who doesn't factor into the Vermont story is this guy on the end, Abijah Jr. He went to Connecticut. He never came to Vermont, as far as I know. But all of the others did come to Vermont. Festus is in green because he's the only one that had children that lived to adulthood. And so my work in genealogy tracks her descendants through that one child. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stories about the family, but I just don't have a lot of time to go into them. Abijah was always on the lookout for land because, like a lot of enslaved people, I believe he felt that owning land was his way to make it, to till the soil and to actually have something for himself. So he was constantly on his horse going places to get land. And the first place he got land in 1775 was Guilford. And he went there. He got 50 acres. They were always fighting with the locals, particularly this guy named John Noyes, who evidently was assaulting him or his family. And Lucy took to Governor Chittenden and made an appearance in court. And the governor said something to the effect of, watch over the princes and sort everything out. Well, I don't think everything's sorted out, because after Abijah died in 1794, the princes left Guilford. And they came to Sunderland, which is another place that Abijah had purchased the right, or had arranged for the rights to land. So in the Sunderland record books, if you can read that, it says First Division of 50 acres of land, and you see his name there, and you see he got lot 20, or had the rights to lot 20. He also had the rights to a couple other pieces of land, which don't really factor into this story. So this is a photo courtesy of Google. I don't know what their transportation was like, but you can imagine in the late 1700s coming from Guilford to Sunderland over the Green Mountains with whatever belongings they had. They did that. The first documented evidence we have of them in Sunderland is 1797, so it was sometime in that period after her husband died and before 1797 that they made the trip over. 5 of the 6 children came over. Of course, they were grown. They were not children. They were grown adult children. And I would love to have seen the reaction of the townspeople in Sunderland when this wagon full of blacks comes into town and they ask, where is lot 20? We want to settle on lot 20. But we don't have that reaction written down anywhere. But what we do know is a gent named Eli Brownson owned lot 20. So you ask, how does that come to be? Well, this is also courtesy of Google. This isn't what the guy looked like. But there was a man in town named Isaac Searles who was kind of, in today's parlance, we'd maybe call him a shyster. He was a wheeler dealer. And there were all kinds of rules, shall we say, about people who had these rights to land. and notifications would go out, you've got to do this, or you've got to pay tax, or you've got to whatever, and Bijah didn't evidently know about any of those things, so his land was forfeited. He also didn't know that. So Brownson got the piece of land, and that was the story. So the princes went to court. And if you think court takes a long time today, it took a lot of years from 1797 was their first petition to the court until 1806. They finally got the rights to the land. But they only got, well, it sort of is more complicated than that, but they only got 18 acres of that 50-acre parcel, and they had to pay $200 for it. And so Lucy went to the town in 1805, and the town said, put it to a vote. Townspeople, will you cough up money to pay the $200? And they voted that down. No funding. We're not paying for the Negro lot. That's what they called it, by the way. Those aren't my words. That's in the town records. It was called the Negro lot. So they actually wrote, I just find this fascinating. They actually wrote a letter to Deerfield, Massachusetts, and said, this is your former slave. Would you pay the $200 to repatriate your slave? I think Deerfield probably just tore that thing up. And this is one of the most heart-wrenching parts in the Sunderland records. In 1806 February, Lucy threw herself on the town. She begged. She groveled. She said, please, you got to help me. So very, very kind of sad moment, isn't it, to see that written. And here's what the town did. I think it's very clever. This is the deed to the land. It's in the Sunderland books. It shows that Eli Brownson sold his land to the selectmen of the town. And the selectmen bought the town for $200 to, see at the bottom, benefit Lucy Prince and her heirs. So in a way, this is why it was so hard to find this deed, because it wasn't written to Lucy Prince. It didn't have Prince anywhere on it except down here. But we couldn't find it in the buyer's or the grantor grantee part of the deeds, because the grantee was the selectmen of Sunderland. Yes?
What happened to Mr. Prince? Because normally back then, only men could hold titles.
Well, he died.
Oh, he died?
So he died in Guilford. So he never even came to
He
Sunderland.
never made the trip.
But you're right. It's very, very amazing. And you'll see she is the landowner here. It's amazing that as a black woman in that time period, she owned a piece of, or she didn't actually ever own it. The selectmen own it, but she was the resident on that piece of land. So this was a very, in a way, clever idea the selectmen had. They bought it. As soon as Lucy and her heirs were gone, they could resell it. So it was really just kind of a set, an investment, I guess, of sorts. So I want to show you this. So here's Lucy's lot 20. And I want to point out lot 21 because that factors into the story. And this is in the town of, the part of Sunderland that, I don't know how well you know Sunderland, but there's what we in town called the borough. It's really where the first settlement was. And there aren't, I should draw them on here. So the Battenkill River sort of goes up here. And there's something called the Mill River that comes down here. So the town was founded along the Mill River, as all these New England towns were, right? So you could have grist mills and sawmills and stuff. So the chap that owned lot 21 was named Amos Chipman. And in the 1800 census for Sunderland, do any of you use census records? Some of you do. So you know in these early records, all they did was count males and females by age, which is all these, I call them tick marks. And then over here, this says all other free people, Indians who are not taxed. That includes blacks. And in the 1800 census for Sunderland, in the place where Amos Chipman is head of household, you see 4 blacks residing. So that's Lucy and 3 of her children. And what we know, so this is from the Russell collection, we know that Amos Chipman had a boarding house dated 1795, and my guess, I don't know, but my guess is that he probably put the princes up in that boarding house and they couldn't pay. So there was probably some expectation of work, or as I was saying to John, there was probably an expectation of servitude that you will do, and I will tell you what to do, and you get to stay here. But at least of course this picture wasn't taken in 1795, but that's what was left of it when the picture was taken. But it was dated as having been constructed in 1795. Yeah,
So this lot was next to lot 20.
correct.
So they didn't live on lot 20, they lived in this building next door. Were they going to farm the land? I don't want to get ahead of you, but.
Good questions, hang on. This is the 1800 census.
Yep.
So they came across, the earliest I know is 1797. They didn't settle their court case till 1803. It was 1806 she throws herself on the town. She didn't have a place to live.
Right.
So in 1800, she's there. Did that answer your question?
Oh, yeah.
Because now we're going to get to 1810, and this sort of goes to your point. There is Lucy Prince, a black woman in the census, head of household, 1810, 4 blacks living in that household. So by 1810, they had cleared their lot 20, they had constructed a house, and they were living there. And she, not her grown son, was listed as the head of the household. I just think that's an amazing historical fact.
How many acres was the property?
So the carve out they gave to Lucy was 18
Okay, that's
acres.
right. That's
So
what I
Brownson continued to own the other portion of that. And living next door are the Chipmans. So that kind of still fits with the lot 2021 thing. Also in 1810 are a couple of her children. So I found her son Totten I living in Middlebury. He's over here, counts as 1. And her son Festus, who you may remember I said was the only one that had children, is listed as head of household with 2 adults and 2 children, which is exactly what we know to be true. But what's amazing, and he's in Cambridge, New York, what's amazing about Festus Prince here is he is not listed over here as a black person. He is listed in the census, and his family is all recorded as whites. And Gretchen Gerzina and her research, and I have come to agree with her, Festus married a white woman. So chances are that when the census person came knocking on the door, the white woman answered the door, and the census person never questioned anything, and Festus was somewhere and the children were asleep, and he just recorded everybody as a white person. So I point this out because this makes research on blacks in the colonial era challenging, because you see things like this and you think, oh, this can't be right. Yeah.
Well, couldn't it be that somebody came to the door, the wife answered, and all hell would have broken loose if they put down in the records that there was a mixed marriage?
That could be
It would
too.
have been, I don't know if it was illegal in Vermont, but it was illegal in a lot of places.
And they were in New York, so I don't know that either,
So I
but
could have just said, let's just.
let's just, yeah. You never know who you get as a census person and how they're going to be. But it is a rather interesting census finding. And in 1820, the census took a slightly different look, and now we have a section called Free Colored Persons, and you'll find Caesar Prince, is the eldest son, is now the head of the household, and then there's 3 females who are Lucy, her daughter Duraxa, and her daughter Drusilla. And that's the group of 4 who lived in Sunderland for the longest period of time. As I mentioned, Tot and I went north. He ended up dying, and Festus also ended up dying pretty young and never came back to Sunderland. So Caesar Prince was a provider. So we have in the Russell collection some old books by merchants where people would buy and sell things. Not sell. The merchant would sell things, people would buy things, and those would get recorded. And here you see an 1815 record with Caesar, and he would do work. See, here he's drawing dung, and here he's digging post holes. So he would do work and get credit, and then he would come home with butter, whiskey, and pork in this example. But he's got many examples in this book where he would do work in exchange for bringing home sundries. And I imagine there was probably never money exchanged. I think it was always that kind of bartering arrangement. But he provided for the family. Hello. Okay. Festus, on the other hand, was a wanderer. And Festus, the write-ups of him are that he was a musician, and he was so talented he could pick up any instrument that anybody gave him, and he could play it. So, and in the Revolutionary War, which he served through Massachusetts, he was a fifer. So doesn't that kind of fit? And he was a little guy. He was, 5'7" and kind of wiry. But his personality was that he was a wanderer. And he marries this white woman. He's got 2 kids, and you find him all over Vermont. So I found him in, I never know how to say this name, Leicester, and then Johnson, Sunderland, and Shaftesbury, and he always gets warned out. That's where I found him, in all these warning out books. Because, do you know about warnings out?
No.
So, in the early days, the towns, if you couldn't fit in, or you couldn't pay your taxes, or you didn't own a piece of land, or whatever reason the town elders felt like saying, they could give you a warning to leave. And those became called warnings out. And Festus is listed in several of the town records as having been warned out, like, buddy, you got to leave town. And I guess he would, because he was kind of all over the place. Vermont had kept the tradition of warnings out longer than any other state in New England, although all states had it for a while. So he was a bit of a wanderer. Here's just a few things in the town records because I wanted to let you know that the town, which remember in the beginning said, no, we're not going to raise any taxes for Negroes, write to Massachusetts, see if they'll do it, we're not helping them. Remember, that was sort of that attitude in the early days. Look how they came around. 1820, they repair the house. They want to build another house for the Negroes. They're cutting wood and they're plowing. They're helping in 1820. In 1821, Lucy is dying. She's 90 years old or something. And they're giving her whiskey and rum to ease her suffering. And they build a coffin for her. And in 1822, Caesar went to jail. We don't know why, because I've been told the court records burned. But the town voted to release him from prison. So they changed in their attitudes toward the black people living in their community. And what brought about that change, we don't know. But Lucy was regaled as quite a storyteller. So I'm going to tell you about that. Maybe I'll jump to that first. In her obituary, this pastor named Lemuel Haynes, do any of you know about him? So he was like he was the first black pastor in New York.
They have in the Bennington Museum.
They have that. Yeah, that's where I took that picture. That's him, a painting of him anyway. He eulogized her. Now he must have known her, and I assume, so I've been told that there was a church in Old Sunderland, but nobody knows where it was. But assuming there was a church there, he may have made his itinerant rounds there, or maybe she went to church in Manchester. I don't know, but somehow he knew her. So he was her minister at her, whatever. He called her, the eulogy is a long thing. It was printed in the newspaper, but I just took a couple excerpts. He called her a remarkable woman, fluent in speech. She captivated all around her, a prodigy in conversation, and people treated her with a degree of deference. And so I think, I don't know, but I think it's these kind of traits that after the townspeople got to know her, they were drawn in by her conversation. They liked to listen to her stories. They liked to hear her talk. They probably brought her their best jam. You know what I mean? Something changed in the town, and I think it's along those lines. I wanted to share this one other point because I think it's historically very interesting, and again, points to the era and time. This is difficult to read, so I typed it down here, but this is not our Lucy Prince. This is another thing that was confusing. Remember I told you Festus married a white woman? Her name was also Lucy. So when she was married, she was Lucy Prince. So when she was widowed, because Festus died, she came back to Sunderland with her 2 children. And the townspeople agreed to cover some expenses of caring for the widow and took care of who? Her children. Now they're called white Negroes. That's a fascinating term, isn't it? So they were what today we would call mixed race. What in a different era they were called mulatto. Here they're called white Negroes. Fascinating stuff. Her daughter died in Sunderland, and she had a small obituary in the Vermont Gazette. And what we learned about her in this obituary is that she was not mentally like all there. She had some mental affliction, even though they claim that she recovered 3 weeks before she died. So on lot 20, Lucy died in 1821. Daraxa, the one with mental health issues, died in 1826. Caesar, the provider, the man of the household, died somewhere around 1836. We don't know. Nothing was written about that. Drusilla, the other daughter, became blind and abject poor, and other families took her in until her death in 1854. So the princes were on the land they were in Sunderland from 1797 until 1854. That's a long time. And the thing about this is they all died in Sunderland, and we do not know where they're buried. Like, nobody wrote that down. There's nothing. So they built coffins for these people, but they didn't write in the books where the coffins were going. So we don't know. I'm going to kind of skip that. That's just about the land. One other thing I wanted to tell you, I'm going to get to this part now where we're looking for, remember I told you they wanted to know where Lucy's land was? It's very difficult finding it because it never had the word prince in it. So I told you the selectmen were the owners of the land. But even when Jim went looking for adjacent properties, he couldn't find it because everything was listed as the Negro lot, so-called, south by the Negro lot. So everything was described as the Negro lot. It was never the Prince's lot. Anything that was, you know. So all this was challenging. All right, let's see how well you guys know your geography. I don't have anything to point with, but this is what is today Sunderland Hill Road going into Manchester. This is the railroad track that was put in sometime in the 1860s. So obviously wasn't there when Lucy was there. Sunderland Hill Road wasn't even there all that way. The road to Manchester back then was this road. It looks sort of dotted now, or dashed. And then it connected up with today's Sunderland Hill Road. That's called Ondawa Road, if any of you have ever been on Ondawa Road. So Lucy's lot is right here. This is the 18-acre piece. And this is, I guess I needed to show you that, but in 1833 the selectmen carved out Lucy's 3-acre piece, and they made the 15 acres down here available for other people. So Lucy Prince and her family lived on that 3-acre triangle, sort of along what is today along Sunderland Hill Road. And there is a house on that property now. So you can't really like go there and tromp around. But that's where they lived. So the next part I'm going to go through is genealogy, and I have half an hour, so we're good. So I published an article in Vermont Genealogy. I told you my research was Festus and his children, and I'm going to go through a little bit of that just to let you know what happened to her descendants. So Festus, now I have to call him Festus 1 because in this story there are 5 Festuses. These people were not really original with names. There were 2 Lucys and a Lucinda, so it gets dicey. So anyway, Festus 1, the son, married Lucy Holman, the white woman, and they had 2 children, a boy and a girl, named Festus and Lucinda, because we can't name them like Robert and Susan, because we can't do that. So we have to have the same names there. Festus 2 also married a Lucy. I don't know anything about her, but they had 2 children that I know about, that I found so far, one of whom is named Festus, who we're going to call Festus the Third. I will talk about Lucinda, who married Richard Johnson, and they had 6 children, and that's where we're going to find descendants. All right, so next we go to Festus the Third. So this is Lucy's great-grandson. So Festus the Third, well, he had a very, very interesting life. But he, in the 1870 census, it said he was married to somebody named Mary. In 72, he was in jail for bigamy. So evidently, he married somebody besides Mary. I don't really know how bigamy works. You have to marry 2 people, I guess. I don't know how you get away with that. But anyway, then he was out of prison in 75, and then he was like sort of all over the place. But his main story is about the Civil War. And so one thing I want to get across about the Prince family is the males in this family all served this country. Both Caesar and Festus served in the Revolutionary War, in the militias in Massachusetts. And these people I'm going to talk about now served in the Civil War. 4 of them served in the Civil War. So they did their part for their country. Now, you can argue they didn't always do it very well, because he got mustered in 63. He says he was promised a bounty of 600. He only received 50, and there's a letter in his pension file where he writes all this out. I was told I was going to get $600 for enlisting. They gave me $50. Nobody cared. They stationed him in New Orleans. He was stationed with stealing. He was stealing pies. He was probably hungry. I don't know. He was stealing pies. They charged him with that, and then insubordination, and he was court-martialed and mustered out of New Orleans in 1865 and went back to New York State, where he was from and where his family was. But that's not bad enough. He developed all kinds of different ailments. I'm not going to read all this to you. This surgeon's note is really long, but he had sciatica, stomach disease, lumbago, blah, 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 blah. So whatever he did in the Civil War, it kind of took its toll, probably that and age. But this is the worst part of it. A woman who was living near him in New York, where he was boarding at a house, and his pension money was supposed to go to the owner of that house to take care of him. Well, this neighbor wrote to the War Department and said, Festus is staying with George Gordon, and they are taking all of his pension, and he goes looking around like a beggar, and they make him do things that they say, and blah, blah, blah. So he is being completely ripped off of his pension money by these people who are supposed to be caring for him. So he has a hard go of it, even though he served his country. Yes?
He got court-martialed, so how does he have a pension?
I don't know. I don't know.
Normally you forfeit that.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit of you're picking up good contradictions. It is a bit of a contradiction. Unless his court-martial I should look at that maybe. Maybe it got overturned.
I had this happen once. I didn't realize there were stages of a court-martial.
Okay.
And you can be honorably discharged, you can be dishonorably discharged, or you can be civilly discharged. And I came across this in a situation in Manchester. A woman and her husband, we were trying to get him into the veterans home, and they were being rejected. And we eventually found out it's because he had been civilly discharged. And through Bernie Sanders' office,
Bernie pulled some strings.
But anyway, what it was is during World War II, in the beginning, he was stationed in Florida, and he came back to Manchester trying to seek out my client, who eventually married him. And she told him, the sheriff told me that if I saw you, to tell you to go back, because he doesn't want to see you. So if he sees you, he's going to have to arrest you.
Oh.
And so he just went back. And then he spent a month or so in the brig, and then they sent him and he served in Normandy.
Wow.
And because he served afterwards, they didn't dishonorably discharge him, but they civilly discharged him, and he did get a pension. And so
maybe
there are, I don't know if that's.
Well, I'm going to show you too.
There are.
Well, I'm going to show you this picture because this is the place where Civil War soldiers went to live, and he was actually allowed to live there. It would be today like a veterans home. So maybe his court-martial
Was one of the in-between ones.
One of the in-betweens, yeah. That's a good thing for me to research. I didn't pick up on that. All right, now we're going to look at Lucinda, who's Lucy's granddaughter.
What is that you thing? Oh, is that?
So you is my term because I can't find that they married. So I do you for union.
Oh.
Because I don't know if they married. Like, I don't know. I don't have a record of it. I assume they married, but I don't know. So I put a U. Richard Johnson was a fairly upstanding citizen in Salem, New York. He was a merchant and a grocer Like he sort of had a little business. And then this family, so they met and married somewhere in Washington County. And their first son, Stephen, was born in Washington County, New York. But after that, they moved west and eventually settled in Geneva. And that's where I found this family, or I found evidence of this family. And Richard in Geneva was listed as a cook, and he, I think two of the sons well, I'll show you this in a minute. They operated boats on the lake there. So this historic church in Geneva, which is an Episcopal church, Diocese of Rochester, kept a lot of records, and thank God, because I could find them, and there's a lot of these princes recorded in the records of that church called Trinity Church. So the town of Geneva, New York is right on the north end of the lake, and at the time, so they moved out there in the 1840s, at the time it was a hub of transportation. The railroad was coming in, of course goods went up and down the lake. I don't know, somehow it connected to the Erie Canal, I don't know all of that, but it was going gangbusters in terms of commerce and economic development. And so the princes lived somewhere on the north end of that lake. So the only child, I didn't put all these in because I didn't think everybody would want to know everything. So everybody who's in light green here, I don't know anything about in terms of descendants. But these two I do. These two went to that church. Festus, so this family is called Lucinda. She's Lucinda Prince, and she marries Richard Johnson. So the children have the surname Johnson. So they have to name a kid Festus Prince Johnson, okay? And what else was I going to say about that? Oh, and then also, I got to go back here a little bit. There's this Festus Prince, and this Festus Prince, when his parents died, went to live with Lucinda and Richard. So there was a Festus Prince in the household, and then Festus Prince Johnson in the household. This is all very confusing to me as a genealogist. I didn't put all this stuff in because I didn't think you'd want to hear it. But anyway, these two had children. And of those two that had children, the only one I've been able to trace down in descendants is Festus Prince Johnson, who union Sarah Ann Jackson, because I've never found marriage records. And of those 5 children who are all listed in the church records, only this one who married, I did find that, Adelaide. No last name, just Adelaide. And they had 3 children. So that's as far down the line as I got. So there's 3 boys, and I'm thinking, pay dirt. One of these 3 boys is going to have produce a living descendant. But I got stuck because this boy died when he was 2. This man became an adult and died when he was like 30, never married. But this guy married, and he lived in New York City. And I know who he married. He married Sally Griggs, and I just don't know if they had children. Now, he did serve. This is not him, but it could be him because it's a picture from Google of a black soldier in World War I at Camp Upton, which is where Harry Johnson was stationed. And so he was in World War I, so was his brother. I told you, this is a military family. He was honorably discharged, and he had an incredible career. He built, like he was part of the building of the Lincoln Tunnel. He built some of those tunnels in Pennsylvania. Like he was in fact, that whole family, the 2 boys here, they were like heavy equipment operators. And both of their jobs in World War I were listed as they were in the engineering unit, and they were like heavy equipment people, truckers and stuff along those lines. And so Harry Johnson was that, and he made an incredible career of that. And then he wound up in a New York State psychiatric hospital in Geneva, New York, where he died in 1993. And I cannot, I've contacted that place. You can't get any records from any psychiatric institution in New York, maybe anywhere. And I don't want to know about his mental condition. I just want to know if he had children. But they won't tell me that. But I'm going to keep trying. Maybe I can find a lawyer who would, like, there's got to be a way through that somehow. But anyway, that's the last descendant of Lucy Prince I know about. And I wish I could find some of the others. I'm going to tell you the challenge with this family is they've got a last name Johnson. And their first names are Charles, George, Sarah, and Stephen. They're not, like, I can find a whole lot of Charles Johnsons who are black, but I can't, there's too many of them for me to research all of them. They evidently left Geneva. I mean, nobody by those names is in the Geneva census after 1875. And they went somewhere, and when I asked the historian in Geneva where these people could have gone, this is what she said to me. She said, before the Civil War, the blacks who lived in Geneva were fairly well situated. As I told you with Richard Johnson, they had jobs, they were kind of getting along. And then after the Civil War, there was an influx of blacks from the South that, in her words, not mine, displaced the blacks who had been living there. And I said, well, where did they all go? Like, did they have a certain migration that they, and she just said, no, they kind of scattered to the wind. So I haven't had any luck finding them, but I'll keep trying. So anyway, that's my story about Lucy Prince. I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah?
Just my burning question, and this is probably something that the answer is obvious, of course you have. But have you heard of Lloyd Stewart and his book, The Mysterious Black Migration?
I have not.
It's basically, it gives historical context, but it's mainly a book about his own family genealogy in Washington County in the early 1800s, including Cambridge, Jackson, Salem, and Granville, with a lot of intermarrying families and everything. I don't know if Prince's or Johnson's are
I
in that
bet
book,
they would be there.
but I highly recommend it.
All right, I'm going to have to write that down because of my memory.
And he came out with it about 2010, and it's really interesting with the whole stepped history of abolition in New York State. Well, flags were free in Vermont, so you could be working in Field and Rupert as a free black man, next to an enslaved black person right over the border of Salem. So he plays a lot with those kind of ironies.
Yeah.
Yeah, really good book.
Is this poem about the bars fight, is that available to read anywhere?
Yes.
Do you have it?
It's
Probably in
anthologized
here.
all over the place.
Hmm?
It's been anthologized all over the place.
Yes, it's. I'm sure it's in here. I don't have it marked, but I'm sure it's in here. Did you read the whole thing? 78 to 80.
You know, it's kind of funny that we're talking about a poem, and there's a poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow about Paul Revere's ride,
Mm-hmm.
and I know that when Paul Revere's ride happened because it was in a poem.
Yeah.
Listen, my children, you shall hear of the midnight
Ride
ride
of
of
Paul
Paul
Revere,
Revere,
the
the 18th of April.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, maybe a way that people. There you go. You can look at it. She captures the names of people and dates and the whole thing. It's the same idea, right? Yeah.
But Longfellow was actually asked why, he didn't include the other two. His flip answer was they didn't rhyme.
So only Paul Revere gets remembered.
Dawes and Prescott try to rhyme Prescott. I can see the problem.
Dawes is pretty easy, maybe.
Question?
Yeah.
How do you explain, or what is it all about that these people, the black people from the South came and then the others left who were there?
Yeah, well, I sort of just took her word for it. I personally don't know that answer. But I was having a conversation with the Geneva historian and saying, got this family here, they're all well documented here over several census records, and then they're just gone. And that was her explanation for me. So I take her at her word, but I don't know that personally. It's a good question, though. Good historical research question.
Just as an aside, about the house she lived in Deerfield,
Yeah,
the Peacock Blue house.
yeah.
Until now, I didn't know that was the house she lived in, but there's a great story about that house. In Dorset, which has a historic district, every house has to be white with black or green shutters, which is not historically accurate going back to the 1800s. But in historic Deerfield, they've got this thing that if you are painting your house, you have to get paint chip analysis to find out the original color of the house. And that happened in historic Deerfield in the 1980s with that Peacock Blue house. And the homeowner who had to paint his wonderful house Peacock Blue,
Because that's what it was.
that's what it was from the paint chip analysis, and he had a response that I just love.
Which was?
Do we really have to suffer for the bad taste of our ancestors?
Did you have a question? No, you're just.
So this all came about because you happened across the name of Lucy Prince in this poem, and just your interest was piqued.
No, it came about because somebody asked my husband to find out where they lived. And so he went off doing that research, and my genealogy head went, well, who was she? Who were her children? That's kind of how I go.
Those early deed books in Sunderland are really pretty interesting.
They're very
I
fascinating.
was once hired I'm an attorney, I was hired by the people who owned the Ira Allen house to tell them whether Ira Allen lived there.
And that's still a question.
No, we traced it back to a pretty large tract. He was Surveyor General in Vermont, and there was a tract where the place is. I don't know if it's that place.
He was lot 1, I think.
But anyway, it says the house that Ethan and I live in now. But anyway, the first page of the Sunderland land records have pictures of cows' heads.
Yes, with
And-
all the marks on their
And
ears.
the ears are slightly, have
Right.
a little different shape
Yeah.
out of each ear. And the old town clerk and I, he's dead now, Bill Bain,
Oh, yeah.
we both thought that was a sort of brand.
Yeah.
And that they were registering the brand, even though it wasn't a brand, it was like taking out different parts of the ear.
Yes.
And that's what our best guess was.
I think that's correct. I
Yeah.
have done research on that too. That's how I
Bill-
interpret.
It was a little bit more, it wasn't the new office, it was
Right.
just next to Bill's house.
Yes.
It was a little-
Yes. But these old records are fascinating, and they're like this page where Bijah's name was. Like, I can only show, because things were torn and then sort of taped back in or glued back in or something like that. And I didn't even show you all the stuff I found in the town records. But there's a lot of, you just have to read through and like squint your eyes and see if you can find Prince or Lucy, or, any of those names, because this handwriting is
What
so.
about the 221s there?
I don't know what that is actually, why. And I don't know what all these other numbers are. And I don't know if Amos Chipman had 2 of them. I don't know any of that. But I think this is Ethan Allen's lot number 1. And the reason I think that is because I was asked, so I'm on the cemetery commission in Sunderland, and I was asked to research, well, where, because our cemetery is called the Ira, well, I said Ethan, didn't I? I meant Ira, I always do that. So our cemetery is called the Ira Allen Cemetery, so I figured he gave his land, and sure enough, I found the deed. He gave this little corner right here is where the cemetery sits, so I believe he was lot 1.
There's a funny thing about Ethan Allen, is that Ira Allen must have been kind of vain, because there's all sorts of portraits of him, busts, all sorts of things. But Ethan Allen, during his lifetime, he had brown hair and a booming voice, and he was over 6 feet tall, and it's about like hip. And, and so down in Washington, D.C., they have, in the Capitol building, they have 2 full-length statues of prominent people from each state. And ours are Frederick Billings and Ethan Allen. And I was trying to think of this guy who did this in like the 1880s. There's no likeness. Like, he looks like a really big Ira Allen. I think the guy just sort of
Brothers, yeah.
fudged it and said, who's gonna know?
You know. Yeah. So.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for coming. Hope you learned something. Yeah. I'm gonna write that.
Thank you very much. I just want to add also that there, historically, people have said there were no black people in Vermont, and more recent research says that, of course, there were. And one really interesting thing that I read an autobiography of Jeffrey Brace years ago, and it went over my head until Sue Washburn reminded me of this, that Jeffrey Brace, for a while, was working as a farmer in Dorset. And it was at the Manly Tavern, which no longer is there, on the West Road, that he met his future wife, who was a waitress there. And she was African American as well. And then there is a whole thing with Dinah Mattis and Paulet in 1777. So there are emerging a lot of stories about the African American presence in Vermont, which is really
Yeah.
quite fascinating.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah.
So-
Thanks for sharing that.
And thanks for sharing your research with us.
You're welcome.
If there are more questions, let's enjoy them over seltzer and cookies in the other room that Erica just brought over. And let you know that next month, May 16th, the third Thursday, mark your calendars, we'll be hearing from Robert Badger, and he'll be talking about Landgrove's Greatest Generation. Yes,
Is Robert Badger Bill Badger's son?
I have no idea.
Oh,
I didn't book the talk, I don't know anything about it.
okay.
But I'll let you know when you're here for the next month's.
Let me know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can ask him.
Can you give me the name of that book again?
Yes, The Mysterious Black Migration,
Okay.
Black.
and it's by Lloyd Stewart. And he lives over in Schenectady.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's a fascinating book, because he really gets into the weeds about whether or not people are freed or not, and according to what year in New York State. So,
Very good. Yeah.
all right.
Take a look at it.
Thank you all.
Thanks for being a good audience.
I was gonna tell you about, you talked about these names.